Hi everyone. Today we are going to read San Diego, California. It starts on page 102. And as I recall, we read about Brent's perspective about going from San Francisco down to San Diego because of the weather. So we've already seen his perspective. So let's see from whose perspective we will now find the whirligig. So page 102. We were at opposite ends of the house and of the lifespan. A hall, a stairway, the den, the dining room, and another hall all lay between us. But even up in my room with the door shut, even listening to the radio loud or looking at my old dolls and scrapbooks, my mind a million miles away, I was conscious of my grandmother's presence. I was always waiting, listening, imagining, always aware someone was dying downstairs. When it was just the two of us home, the entire house seemed to resound with her heartbeat. I'd plug in the portable intercom by my bed and count the minutes until my mother came home from errands or my father from the university. Fortunately, my grandmother slept a lot. My mother assured me she was doing just that when she left to go shopping one day in July. I was reading a collection of Anne Frank's father's letters, then realized that I'd stopped and was just staring at the intercom. 5 seconds later, the sound of my grandmother clearing her throat came through the speaker, a long overture of scraping and swallowing. My heart began to race. Rachel! I closed my eyes. Rachel was her sister, long dead. No, Deborah! Her daughter, my mother. More throat clearing. Deborah, please come. The words catapulted me off the bed. Her moment had arrived. Impossible, I answered back. Everyone said the chemotherapy had helped. I flew down the wood stairway, pushed by duty, pulled back by dread. I loved my grandmother, but I did not love shots, bedpans, puking, or the sight of stitches. I was 15 and still hated taking pills. I rushed down her hall and opened the door. So some of us can really make a personal connection with having a family member who has been ill or is currently ill. And either you've had the person living in the house with you or you've gone to visit. I know it is very, very stressful. When I was taking care of my mom, you kind of sit there waiting and worry that any moment something bad might happen. What's the matter? I almost yelled the words. She was still in her pink nightgown, propped up in her old canopied bed. Her head turned slowly from the intercom to me. Jenny, I called for Deborah. She's gone out. I scanned her. The skin hung in accordion folds on her cheeks and drooped below her eyelids, but didn't seem to be flushed or pale. Her small eyes were bright. Why did you call? What's wrong? What? She refused to admit that she needed a hearing aid. I sat on her bed and bellowed as if she were across the Grand Canyon. How do you feel? Weak, she said. No strength. Talk like this was a change for her. Until lately, she'd always answered like Jesse Owens or like Joe DiMaggio. She was an amazingly positive person for someone who'd been in Auschwitz. So, everybody, we just completed a Holocaust about a month and a half ago in social studies. Try to think back and remember if you have heard of the concentration camp Auschwitz. This is where you can activate your prior knowledge, it's called. You are making connections, but you're making connections to the world or to history. I took her hand and stealthily looked, for the 1,000th time, at the place on her wrist where her number had been tattooed. She'd had it removed and seemed to have done the same with her memory of that time. She never brought it up and wouldn't answer my questions. What do you need? Is Joseph home? She asked in return. He's still at work. She looked down and mumbled her disappointment. Then her head rose, her eyes scuttled over me. Do you drive, Kindla? Yes, Grandma. So here's an Easter egg. On page 104, in actually italicized letters, is Kindla, and I'm probably not even saying it right. If I was reading it to myself, I would be looking it up and see how to at least pronounce it. It must be another language, so I challenge you to find out what language it is and what does it mean. Yes, Grandma? So grown up you are, Jenny. She viewed me with pride. So tall. Such beautiful brown hair. She smiled. Let's go then. I stared back at her in panic. But I don't have a real license yet. Are you kidding? Go where? So I want you to make a prediction right now. Where do you think the grandmother wants to go? Or do you think she does want to go someplace? Or is she kind of stuck like she was when she was asking for her sister who had been passed already? So I want you to make a prediction. Somewhere. I knew where from my parents' experience. To a pharmacy laid out on El Cajon where the trustworthy son of a friend of hers worked. Or on a scavenger hunt for a brand of cracker that hadn't been made in 20 years. Or cheese she remembered from back in Poland. Nothing had tasted good to her since the cancer treatments had started. Grandma, listen! I'll call my father. He'll stop by on his way home. What do you need? This he can't bring me. First, help me dress. But I only have a learner's permit, I stammered. An adult always has to be with me. I'm not an adult? I'm not old enough? She gave a laugh which started her coughing. Her left hand pointed at the closet while she hacked. The navy blue dress, she got out at last. Her accent was still thick. Then again, Yiddish was her first language, English her sixth. And the black shoes, Jenny dear. Practically all of her shoes were black. I stood before her clothes and bit off 2 fingernails. So let's make an inference here. Why do people, according to your prior knowledge, bite their fingernails? And based on that, how do you think Jenny is feeling right now? We can make an inference on her emotions based upon her actions. I agree. I used to bite my fingernails all the time and it was more anxiety based. I know some people do it out of boredom. However, I think in this case, it sounds like Jenny is very nervous because she has to pick out clothes for her grandmother who suddenly wants her to bring her somewhere. With my mother gone, that left only the old Toyota, a manual. I hated shifting. I turned around. But Grandma, my mother can take you. She'll be home in 2 hours at... No more waiting, she declared. Waiting is dangerous when you're my age. I gathered her clothes and helped her get into them. The temperature was in the 90s, but she insisted on that wool dress, broiling and ancient. Likewise, on a wig from the Eisenhower era to hide her chemo-caused baldness. Though our house was quite modern, with lots of glass and odd angles, my grandmother's clothes and furniture made her room into a time machine. From her heavy, claw-footed dresser, I got the gold brooch that she asked for. Then I helped her up and put her cane in her hand. The bend of its handle matched her back. We inched our way down the hall. We go left here, Grandma. It's shorter. I was now a full head taller than she was. I pulled her gently to the left and winced at the sight of her baggy dress. She'd lost weight and height in the past few years. I let her rest. No hurry, I said. It was a week since she'd been out of her room. Only a year before she'd live in her own apartment, walked to the grocery, taking cabs to visit her friends. When my mother insisted she move in with us, her doctor's visits increased, but the rest of her world began shrinking. First to the house, then to her room, and finally to her bed. Leading her out the front door, I couldn't help but think how little she resembled the woman who'd walked in the summer before. I can make a personal connection here because when I was actually your age, so probably 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, my grandmother, I used to call her Nunno, was bedridden. And at first she had this rare condition of arthritis of the lungs, and so she couldn't breathe well. And when you can't breathe well, you can't really do a lot. So she was on oxygen. And I remember her, she used to sit out in the sun all the time, even with her oxygen, and be very tan. But then as the years went on, she ended up being, confined to the house and then confined to her bed, which was really sad. Grandma, where are we going? Judging by her clothes, it was someplace fancy. I'll show you. The car was sitting out in the driveway and was hot as a sauna inside. I opened the doors to cool it off, got her seated, and turned the key. The engine gave a growl like a guard dog and died. It took 2 more tries to get it going. The air conditioning didn't work, naturally. I let the engine warm up a long time while I looked down at the gear shift knob, its handy shifting pattern worn away. For a full minute, I searched for a reverse. When I found it, it turned out to be 4th. I stalled, which saved us from ramming the garage door. I hunted some more, reminded myself of my excellent record in driver's training, found reverse, and shot back out of the driveway at a speed that threw both of us forward. Thank God the car was too old to have airbags. I fiddled with the gear shift, found first, and proceeded down the street as nonchalantly as possible. I realized my grandmother was eyeing me. Maybe it's better I wait for... Grandma, I can drive. Just tell me where you need to go. She knew San Diego well, which was good since I was giving all my attention to finding the clutch with my floppy sandals and getting into first without stalling. So I don't know if any of you know the difference between an automatic or a manual. A manual is a stick shift. It is super different to drive. You do have to constantly have your hand on the shift and make sure that you, I don't even know what it's called, put the, not the gas and not the brake, but the other pedal down while you're shifting. So it's interesting. If you ever have a chance to drive a stick shift, you should, because it definitely makes you feel like you are, in charge of this big, huge piece of metal. We're on page 107. She knew San Diego well. We drove a long way down Marina. The breeze from the open windows kept me cool until my grandmother had me roll hers up. We drove along Mission Bay, then reached Old Town. Stop! She called out. I slammed on the brakes. So did the 10 cars behind me. There was honking. I was stopped in the middle of the street. I wanted to yell, my grandmother told me to. Cars zoomed around me. Mine had stalled and didn't want to start again. I could feel the blood rise into my cheeks. I glanced furiously over at my grandmother and found her staring at a white-barked tree. All right, Jenny dear, go on. I was speechless. She was completely unaware of what was happening. I felt like getting mad at her, but then I saw that her face had that unfocused look it had more and more lately. She was often confused or lost in her thoughts. How could I blow up at her for that? So let's make a prediction here. Why do you think that she told Jenny to stop? It was in the middle of the road. Cars are zooming past. And Jenny just notices that she was staring at a white-barked tree. So take a moment to make a prediction about what you think is going on right here. Is it just she had a momentary lapse of understanding and that she's in the present and she's going back to the past? Does it mean something? Are they somewhere important? What do you think? Try to use textual evidence even in your head to support your prediction. I got the car going. I put it into first and took off, trying to forget the whole scene. Turn right when you come to the furniture store. She navigated by landmarks, an old world fashion, not by blocks and street names. I am very guilty of that. I have no idea, even growing up in Portland, street names. But not really. You need to tell me monuments or buildings or shops or schools, and then I'll know how to get there. I turned. My bangs were damp on my forehead. We entered downtown. Too many cars and buses. My hands were sweaty from both heat and nervousness. Next time you want to stop, Grandma, give me a little warning, I said. What? I was repeating myself at a higher volume when she suddenly called out, Here it is! I almost braked, then looked in the mirror. Nothing was behind me. I stopped. Go back a little. I rolled my eyes, fumbled with the gear shift, found reverse, and backed up. We were somewhere on 4th. She was staring at a little Chinese restaurant. Cars were coming. I put on my turn signal, then the warning lights, just to be safe. Again, it's changed, she said. The wave of traffic washed around us. She sat and stared. Grandma, there are restaurants closer to home with good Jewish food. Keep going, Kindla. I don't think she heard me. She looked back at the restaurant as we left. Keep going where? Straight, I'll tell you. I thought of the time she'd let my mother's starting and stopping all over town in search of a phantom bakery. Why had I agreed to this? We drove down to Broadway, then turned left. The neighborhood started making me nervous. I checked the gas, something I now remembered you were supposed to do before you left. I had a quarter tank. We turned up 30th. Are you sure you know where we're going? I asked. At the brick church there. Make a right turn. I turned. She stopped me a few doors down in front of a stucco house shedding paint. 2 little black girls stared at us from behind a palm tree in the yard. Grandma, are you lost? There's no stores in this block. She was silent. Then she said, Rachel lived here. I gazed at the house. My middle name is Rachel, given in honor of my grandmother's sister. Strange, I thought, that my parents had then given me a first name like Jennifer, as far from the Old Testament and the old country as you could get. Then again, maybe that was the point, to put Poland and Hitler and the camps behind them, to blend in for a change instead of sticking out. They'd done this so well, never going to synagogue, avoiding speaking of my grandmother's experience, even getting a Christmas tree, that they propelled me in the opposite direction. So I have somewhat of a thick question. It's partly thin as well. Why would having a Christmas tree or not going to the synagogue not jive with the grandmother? Now, we know that she speaks Yiddish. We know that she's using a different language, Kindle. We know that she was in Auschwitz. So think about the reasons for all of that and what were her parents trying to do? They're trying to keep her away from what? So the point is here that the grandmother was from Poland. She's Jewish. She spent time in Auschwitz. Auschwitz, I think, was one of the concentration camps with the most number of people killed. So synagogues is a place where you go to worship when you're Jewish. They do not celebrate Christmas. They celebrate Hanukkah. So it sounds like they named their daughter Jennifer instead of a Hebrew name or a Polish name because they want to separate themselves from what caused the grandmother, so much pain. So in 110, I'd enrolled myself in Hebrew school, older than all the other students, and I had nervously, proudly chanted my portion of the Torah at my bar mitzvah in May. I'd read every grisly account of the Holocaust I could find and gave all my birthday money that year to Simon Wiesenthal's Nazi hunting group. Never, I'd vowed, would I visit Germany. My mother warned me that I was too serious and didn't smile enough to attract boys. So, do any of you know what the Torah is? Torah. Or a bat mitzvah? Those are interesting Easter eggs, plus it would increase your knowledge of other cultures. Grandma! Go now, Kindla. I got back on 30th and headed north. We were nearing my grandmother's old neighborhood. At the red light at university, she began pointing like a tour guide. That building there, that was a pharmacy. We used to have our ice cream there. You couldn't keep ice cream at home, not then. It would melt in the icebox. And there's the theater. The old Fox North Park was still standing, like a Mayan pyramid overgrown by jungle. I caught Tom Cruise on the same marquee that had probably advertised Charlie Chaplin. The light changed. I was not surprised to find my grandmother taking us on a detour to her old house, 2 blocks over on Kansas. I found it and idled. It was hard to believe that the squat white bungalow before us, with its torn screen door and dead tree by the walk, was the site of my mother's golden childhood, my grandfather's neighborhood croquet tournaments, the boisterous family get-togethers I'd heard of. 2 seagulls circled above it like vultures. The house looked abandoned. Maybe it was. Grandma, I'm going to run out of gas if we keep this up. She mumbled something, not in response to me, I realized. I cocked my ear. She was speaking in Yiddish. I only know a few words and had no idea what she was saying. She went on and on, facing the house, one hand on the gold brooch she was wearing. My eyes skipped from the sagging awning to the littered porch to my grandmother's face. Her eyes were closed, her lips still moving. Then she was silent. Then she said, Please go. I put the car into first and moved on. Stopping at a light, I saw ahead a little deli that I knew she liked. It dawned on me that she'd been leading us there. I was suddenly feeling hungry myself. We approached. I slowed to grab a parking place. Why are you shopping? She asked. Back home now. But Grandma, you never... She didn't hear. Thank you, Kindla. Very much. But we never got what you wanted, I shouted. Her head wobbled toward me. Where did you want to go? She looked puzzled. To my house, where we just come from. To Rachel's house, God give her rest. To the stationery store we had, 26 years until Jacob died. I pictured the Chinese restaurant. I swallowed. Then I thought of our first stop. So, try to remember the prediction you made about the grandmother asking Jenny to stop in the middle of the street and Jenny noticed her looking at the tree. Now you can confirm or adjust your prediction. What about the tree? A birch tree, she said. There were very many birches in Poland where I grew up. The white bark, so beautiful. She inhaled deeply and wiped her eyes. All these I wanted to see a last time. So did your prediction match, or did you have to adjust it? I was the driver but hadn't understood the journey. All at once I could barely see for the tears. I gripped the wheel tightly with both hands, trying to keep control of both the car and myself. You're getting better, Grandma. You've got lots of life left. I was doing my best to convince both of us. She shook her head. Some things, Kindla, you know inside. The brooch, I now remembered, had been a gift from my grandfather, presented at their 40th anniversary party. Had the blue dress been a favorite of his too, back in the years when it fit her? We drove without speaking. We passed close by the apartment house she lived in before joining us. She said she didn't need to see it, but 1 block later, her hand came up. Turn at that mailbox there, one more stop. We were in a residential neighborhood, older and well kept. Half a block down, she asked me to halt and then to turn around to put the car on the other side of the street. We idled in front of a 2-story house with a fan light over the door and a porch occupied by 4 rockers. I stop here for me and for you, she said. I couldn't see the link to either of us. Why here? She pointed a shaky finger to the left. The toy? I asked. She nodded. Mounted on the corner of the low porch wall was a whirligig, its propeller turning in the late afternoon breeze. I studied it. It was a figure of a whale with a white triangle that was supposed to be its spray. The spray moved up and down above the blowhole. On top of the spray sat a black-haired woman. "Look," said my grandmother. We stared at it. The breeze picked up, making the spout clack up and down like a sewing machine needle. I glanced at my grandmother. She was smiling. "Somebody," she said, "I don't know who, said there shouldn't be laughing after Auschwitz, that nobody could ever want to laugh again after the things that happened there." She rotated her head toward me. "But I was there, Quintilla. Yes, very terrible. What I saw you should never dream. But I can also tell you that all those that died want that we should have a life with laughing. Not sad all the time, always reading books about Nazis and men who like killing. They want us to laugh all the laughs that were taken away from them." I looked at the whirligig, but I was sniffling, not laughing. "People are not all Hitler, Quintilla. People are very good also, like the one who made this wind toy to give happiness to everyone who pass. People are good, even some Germans. When the bad memories come back in my head, here I walk to remind myself of this. This, not the other. I want to remember when I think my thoughts before I die. This I tell you, who have the permit for learning. I'm old. I have the permit for teaching." I leaned across and threw my arms around her. It was a long time before I let go. Then we both gazed at the whirligig. I wiped my eyes and watched the whale spout. I glimpsed a smile on my grandmother's mouth. I felt it leap like a spark to mine. I turned off the car's engine and rolled down all the windows. I have no idea how long we sat there. I'm not going to talk about it right now. I'll talk about it before our next reading and probably during Google Hangout.